Bad first impression. I, God, I hate to pick on him, but Bill Murray gave me a really iffy first.
It all started with two quiet words that would take more than 50 years to fully understand. During a charity fundraiser in Aspen, a nervous 12-year-old girl glanced across the room and whispered, "That man scares me." The little girl was Gwyneth Paltrow. Standing beside her was Anjelica Huston, a woman who had spent years with one of Hollywood's most magnetic stars. Instead of dismissing the child's fear, Anjelica looked at her and replied, "He scares me too." At the time, she was still deeply involved with Jack Nicholson, a man admired by millions for his legendary smile, unforgettable performances, and effortless charm. But behind the cameras and glamorous parties was a relationship that left scars no award could erase. For decades, Anjelica stayed silent, protecting memories few people truly understood. Now, at 74, she's finally revealing what life with Nicholson was really like. And the truth is far more heartbreaking than the public ever imagined. This isn't just another Hollywood romance. It's the story of how love, fame, and heartbreak became impossible to separate. And what happened behind closed doors may completely change the way you see one of cinema's biggest legends. But before Jack Nicholson entered her life, another extraordinary man had already shaped her understanding of love forever. Long before she became an Oscar-winning actress, Anjelica Huston grew up surrounded by greatness and chaos. Her father, legendary filmmaker John Huston, wasn't just one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors. He was a force of nature. He created cinematic classics, commanded every room he entered, and lived entirely by his own rules. Marriage, loyalty, and convention never seemed to slow him down. Multiple relationships, countless adventures, and a life filled with unpredictability became normal for the Huston family. As a young girl, Anjelica watched powerful men come and go, learning that brilliance often arrived hand in hand with emotional distance. Without realizing it, those early experiences quietly shaped what she believed love looked like. She admired strength, confidence, and larger-than-life personalities, even when they carried heavy emotional costs. Years later, those childhood lessons would lead her straight toward another man whose charisma could light up any room, but whose personal life was just as complicated. Looking back now, it's almost impossible not to wonder whether history was quietly repeating itself, and fate would make sure their paths crossed sooner than anyone expected. In 1973, everything changed with a single invitation. Anjelica had only recently returned to California when she attended a party at Jack Nicholson's home. Nicholson was already becoming one of Hollywood's hottest stars, with unforgettable performances making him the center of attention wherever he went. The chemistry between them was immediate. Friends noticed it. Guests noticed it. Even Jack seemed captivated. But everyone also knew something else about him. His reputation with women was no secret. Relationships came and went, and commitment wasn't exactly his strongest quality. Anyone paying attention could see the warning signs before the romance even began. Still, when someone possesses that level of confidence and charm, logic often loses the battle. Anjelica believed she could see a different side of him, one hidden beneath the public image. She wasn't chasing a celebrity. She believed she had found someone extraordinary. That hope would keep her holding on far longer than she ever imagined. Unfortunately, it didn't take long before reality started revealing itself in painful ways. The very first warning arrived before their relationship had even truly begun. Their first official date never happened. Instead of spending the evening with Anjelica, Jack canceled his plans so he could meet another woman from his past. There were no dramatic excuses or elaborate explanations. That was simply who he was. Most people would have taken the cancellation as an obvious sign to walk away. Anjelica didn't. She convinced herself it was just a misunderstanding, a small bump at the beginning of what could still become a beautiful relationship. Looking back, She admitted that this moment became the blueprint for everything that followed. Time after time, Jack would show her exactly who he was. Time after time, she would feel the sting, forgive him, and believe tomorrow would somehow be different. It wasn't because she was naive. It was because love has a remarkable way of convincing people to ignore the evidence right in front of them. Every disappointment came with just enough affection to keep hope alive. And that cycle would continue for nearly 2 decades. But the emotional roller coaster was only beginning, and the next chapter would prove even harder to escape. As their relationship deepened, Jack Nicholson mastered a pattern that became impossible to ignore. After every painful disappointment came an unforgettable gesture. Luxury cars, expensive jewelry, rare paintings, thoughtful surprises. His generosity seemed endless. To the outside world, it looked like the perfect Hollywood romance. Friends saw glamorous vacations, award shows, and 2 beautiful stars living an incredible life together. What they didn't see were the tears that often came before those extravagant gifts arrived. Anjelica would later realize that every present carried invisible baggage, quietly covering wounds that never had time to heal. She wasn't staying because of the expensive gifts. She stayed because the man capable of causing so much pain was also capable of making her feel more loved than anyone else ever had, at least for brief moments. That emotional contradiction became almost impossible to escape. Every time she thought about leaving, another glimpse of the man she fell in love with pulled her back. But outside their private world, Jack's attention was beginning to wander more openly than ever before, and soon, the entire world would start noticing what Anjelica had been trying so hard to ignore. The cracks in their relationship soon became impossible to hide. At glamorous film festivals, exclusive parties, and sold-out concerts, Jack Nicholson rarely acted like a man in a committed relationship. One of the most painful moments came during the Cannes Film Festival, where beautiful women openly approached him, asking if he'd join them for a ride through the city. Without hesitation, he'd smile, say goodbye to Anjelica, and disappear, leaving her standing alone while cameras flashed all around them. She later admitted those moments were humiliating, but she kept convincing herself they were simply part of loving someone as famous as Jack. Deep down, she hoped one day he'd choose her over everyone else. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. It really helps us bring you more incredible Hollywood stories like this one. Sadly, the public flirting was only the beginning. What Anjelica would soon discover inside Jack's own home hurt far more than anything she'd witnessed in public. And once she saw it with her own eyes, pretending everything was normal became almost impossible. It wasn't gossip that finally opened Anjelica's eyes. It was the evidence scattered throughout Jack's house. She began finding unfamiliar jewelry resting on tables, jackets that didn't belong to her hanging in closets, and little reminders that another woman had recently been there. Each discovery felt like another silent confession. Instead of confronting him every single time, she sometimes did something almost unbelievable. She would wear the jewelry herself, wondering if anyone would notice or come looking for it. No one ever did. On another occasion, she spotted a woman walking down the street, wearing a jacket she instantly recognized as her own. She stood there in disbelief, but said nothing. Those moments slowly changed her. The heartbreak never disappeared, but she learned to hide it behind forced smiles and quiet acceptance. Looking back years later, she admitted she eventually developed a strange sense of humor about the situation. Not because it stopped hurting, but because laughing became easier than crying every day. Yet despite everything she'd witnessed, one dream still refused to fade. She believed that marriage could somehow change everything. For Anjelica, the relationship was never meant to stay casual forever. She imagined a future filled with stability, a home they would build together, and eventually children. After investing years of her life into Jack, she believed those dreams weren't unreasonable. But every time the subject of marriage came up, Jack responded with jokes, sarcasm, or complete indifference. While watching television together one evening, he mocked a game show centered around newlyweds, laughing at the very idea of marriage as if lifelong commitment were something to be ridiculed instead of celebrated. It wasn't just a passing comment. It revealed how differently they viewed the future. Anjelica kept hoping his attitude would soften with time, believing that love could eventually change even the most independent man. But as the years passed, that hope became harder to defend. The more she envisioned a shared future, the more obvious it became that Jack wasn't imagining the same life. Still, she wasn't ready to walk away. Instead, she pushed for the answer she'd been waiting years to hear, and his response would leave her completely shattered. One emotional conversation changed everything. After years of uncertainty, Anjelica finally confronted Jack directly about marriage. Frustrated and exhausted, she challenged him, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally commit. Instead, his response came instantly, and it cut deeper than she ever expected. He dismissed the idea completely, making it painfully clear that marriage simply wasn't something he wanted with her. Those few words destroyed years of hope in a matter of seconds. Anjelica later admitted she cried for 3 straight days. Anyone listening might assume that was the end of the relationship. It wasn't. When the tears stopped, she stayed. That decision puzzled many people, but anyone who's ever loved someone deeply knows emotions rarely follow logic. Walking away from nearly 2 decades of memories wasn't as simple as packing a suitcase. She kept believing that the man she loved was still somewhere beneath the fear of commitment. Unfortunately, life was preparing one final heartbreak that would make every previous disappointment seem small by comparison. By now, their relationship had become a constant battle between hope and reality. Every betrayal was followed by kindness. Every painful moment was balanced by affection, making it nearly impossible for Anjelica to separate the man who broke her heart from the man who could make her feel completely cherished. Friends questioned why she stayed. The public admired what looked like one of Hollywood's most glamorous couples. Almost nobody understood the emotional tug-of-war happening behind closed doors. Yet while her personal life seemed trapped in an endless cycle, something remarkable was happening professionally. Directors were beginning to recognize a depth in Anjelica's performances that few actresses could match. The pain she carried wasn't destroying her career. It was quietly transforming her into one of Hollywood's most unforgettable talents. Ironically, the relationship causing so much heartbreak would unfold alongside the greatest professional triumph of her life. And when one legendary director handed her the role of a lifetime, everything about her future was about to change, in ways neither she nor Jack could have predicted. The turning point in Anjelica Huston's life didn't come through her relationship with Jack Nicholson. It came from her father. By the mid-1980s, legendary director John Huston was preparing what would become one of his final masterpieces, Prizzy's Honor. Instead of looking elsewhere for the perfect actress, he chose his own daughter to play morose Prizzy, a woman whose heartbreak slowly transforms into cold determination. It wasn't an easy role, but Anjelica poured years of real emotion into every scene. Ironically, Jack Nicholson was cast alongside her, forcing the couple to bring their complicated personal lives onto a movie set where loyalty, betrayal, and revenge were central themes. Many people watching the finished film had no idea how closely those emotions mirrored reality. Critics praised Anjelica's performance, calling it fearless and unforgettable. Then came Hollywood's biggest night. When the Academy Awards arrived, Anjelica's name echoed through the auditorium as the winner for Best Supporting Actress. Sitting nearby was Jack, applauding proudly as the woman he loved reached the highest point of her career. It looked like a perfect fairy tale ending, but behind the applause, the cracks in their relationship were still growing wider, and success couldn't repair what was quietly falling apart. Winning an Oscar changed Anjelica Huston's career forever, but it didn't change the man waiting for her at home. Overnight, she became one of Hollywood's most respected actresses, receiving bigger roles, greater recognition, and admiration from audiences around the world. To outsiders, it seemed like she finally had everything: a legendary career, and one of cinema's biggest stars by her side. But fame has a way of hiding private pain. Behind closed doors, the same emotional cycle continued. Jack remained unpredictable, charming one moment and emotionally distant the next. The glamorous headlines never mentioned the lonely nights or the growing realization that professional success couldn't fill the emptiness left by a relationship that never truly felt secure. Friends noticed her confidence on screen becoming stronger, while privately, she struggled with the same unanswered questions she'd carried for years. Could love really survive without trust? Or was she simply holding on to a version of Jack that no longer existed? Before she could find those answers, another devastating loss entered her life, one that would leave her searching for strength in places she'd never expected. In 1987, Anjelica faced one of the hardest moments of her life, when her father, John Huston, passed away after a remarkable career that had shaped generations of filmmakers. Their relationship hadn't always been simple, but his influence on her life was undeniable. He was the man who introduced her to the world of storytelling, challenged her to become a stronger actress, and ultimately gave her the role that earned her an Oscar. Losing him felt like losing the foundation beneath her feet. Grief arrived quietly at first, then all at once. Friends hoped Jack Nicholson would become the steady source of comfort she desperately needed during such a painful time. In some moments he was there for her, offering warmth and support. But the uncertainty that had always existed between them never truly disappeared. Even while mourning her father, Anjelica couldn't escape the emotional instability that had defined so much of their relationship. It became painfully clear that the person she leaned on most wasn't capable of giving her the consistency she longed for. Yet an even darker experience was about to teach her the difference between emotional pain and something far more dangerous. Not every difficult relationship in Anjelica Huston's life followed the same pattern. During a brief period away from Jack, she became involved with actor Ryan O'Neal, believing a fresh start might finally bring the peace she'd been missing. Instead, the relationship took a frightening turn. Years later, Anjelica spoke openly about an incident in which O'Neal became physically aggressive. Unlike the years she spent trying to understand Jack's emotional contradictions, this time her decision was immediate. She walked away and never looked back. Looking back on that chapter, she made her feelings unmistakably clear, saying that any man who raises a hand against a woman deserves to be exposed and left behind. It was one of the strongest public statements she'd ever made, revealing that despite everything she'd endured, she knew exactly where her line was. The contrast between those two relationships was striking. One slowly wore down her heart over many years, while the other ended the moment respect disappeared completely. That painful lesson stayed with her, and she would soon channel every ounce of that emotion into performances audiences would never forget. By the early 1990s, Anjelica Huston had discovered something extraordinary. Every heartbreak she'd experienced seemed to make her performances even more powerful. Audiences watched her transform into unforgettable characters, like the chilling Grand High Witch in The Witches, the sharp and mysterious Lily Dillon in The Grifters, and soon afterward, the iconic Morticia Addams, a role that would define an entire generation. There was an elegance beneath the darkness, a quiet strength hidden behind every glance, and viewers couldn't look away. Critics praised her ability to bring complicated women to life, because she understood emotional conflict better than most actors ever could. While fans celebrated her incredible success, very few realized how much of that authenticity came from real experiences behind the scenes. The woman captivating Hollywood on screen was still carrying years of unanswered questions in her personal life. Then, just when she thought the worst might finally be behind her, Jack Nicholson invited her to dinner with what sounded like important news. She walked in hoping everything was about to change. Instead, that conversation would become the moment their entire relationship finally collapsed. The dinner invitation felt different. After years of emotional highs and crushing lows, Anjelica allowed herself to believe Jack Nicholson was finally ready to have the conversation she'd waited nearly 2 decades to hear. Maybe he wanted a fresh start. Maybe he had realized what she meant to him. Hope has a way of returning when you least expect it. And that evening, she walked through his door carrying more hope than she'd admitted to anyone. But within moments, everything changed. Jack calmly revealed that another woman, Rebecca Broussard, was expecting his child. There was no dramatic apology, no attempt to soften the blow, just a quiet confession that shattered the future Anjelica had spent years imagining. In an instant, every compromise she'd made, every tear she'd hidden, and every second chance she'd given him came rushing back. She later realized there was no room left for denial. The relationship she'd fought so hard to save had reached its unavoidable ending. Yet even after hearing those devastating words, one final chapter remained. And what happened next would become the most explosive confrontation of their entire relationship. Most people assumed Anjelica quietly walked away after learning the truth. The reality was far more emotional. Only days later, another painful reminder appeared when a magazine published fresh stories linking Jack to yet another woman. Whether the article was new or recycled no longer mattered. For Anjelica, it was simply one heartbreak too many. Years of disappointment, embarrassment, and unanswered questions finally caught up with her all at once. Instead of staying home, she drove straight to the Paramount Pictures lot, where Jack was working. She wasn't interested in another argument or another explanation. She wanted him to understand the weight of everything she'd carried for so many years. When they came face to face, emotions exploded. The calm, patient woman the public thought they knew disappeared, replaced by someone who had reached her absolute limit. It wasn't just about one betrayal. It was about 17 years of accumulated pain finding its way to the surface. Surprisingly, Jack didn't respond the way anyone expected. His reaction revealed a side of their relationship few people had ever seen. Their confrontation became the emotional climax of a relationship that had lasted nearly 17 years. Anjelica later admitted she struck Jack repeatedly, unleashing years of bottled-up frustration in a matter of moments. Those who hear the story today are often surprised by what happened next. Jack didn't fight back. He barely defended himself at all. When it was over, both of them understood something had finally ended. Strangely, the story didn't conclude with anger. A short time later, Jack sent her an expensive pearl and diamond bracelet, along with a note that carried his signature sense of humor. It was an unusual gesture, part apology, part acknowledgement, and perhaps an admission that he knew he'd caused immense pain. Looking back, Anjelica described the entire situation with one simple word: tragic. Not because there had never been love, but because love alone had never been enough to build the future she'd wanted. The chapter had closed, yet fate wasn't finished bringing them together. Years later, another film would place them face to face once again, forcing both of them to revisit memories they thought had been left behind forever. Several years after their breakup, fate reunited Anjelica and Jack on the set of The Crossing Guard. They were no longer lovers trying to save a relationship. They were seasoned actors stepping back into each other's lives, with years of distance between them. At first, the atmosphere was understandably awkward. Conversations were polite but cautious, as though both were carefully avoiding old wounds. Then, on the final day of filming, they shared lunch together, and the walls slowly came down. Jack looked at Anjelica and compared their relationship to an unforgettable love story that somehow survived impossible circumstances. He even told her she had been the love of his life, Hearing those words stirred emotions she'd spent years trying to quiet. But with time came clarity. She realized someone can deeply love another person and still be incapable of giving them the life they deserve. That understanding brought peace she had never found during the relationship itself. For the first time, she accepted that some romances are unforgettable, not because they succeed, but because of what they teach us. And just as one chapter finally closed, another man entered her life with a completely different kind of love. After years of emotional uncertainty, Anjelica found something she had almost stopped believing existed: stability. She married acclaimed sculptor Robert Graham, whose quiet, dependable nature couldn't have been more different from the whirlwind she'd experienced with Jack Nicholson. There were no constant headlines, no endless rumors, and no emotional roller coaster. Instead, there was trust, respect, and the everyday kind of love she'd always wanted, but rarely experienced. For the first time in many years, she wasn't waiting for the next disappointment. Friends noticed a change in her. She seemed calmer, more confident, and genuinely content with the life she had built. Although the memories of Jack never completely disappeared, they no longer controlled her future. She had finally discovered that lasting love isn't measured by dramatic moments or grand gestures, but by consistency and peace. Sadly, life had one more heartbreaking test in store. Robert's health would begin to decline, leading Anjelica into another season of loss, one that would once again reveal the incredible strength that had carried her through every chapter of her extraordinary life. Just as Anjelica Huston believed she had finally found lasting happiness, life delivered another heartbreaking blow. Robert Graham, the man who had given her the stability she'd searched for over so many years, became seriously ill. Unlike the unpredictable relationships that had defined much of her younger life, this chapter was built on loyalty and quiet devotion. Anjelica stayed by Robert's side throughout his long battle, determined to give him the same unwavering support he had always given her. When he passed away in 2008, she wasn't simply mourning a husband. She was saying goodbye to the one person who had shown her what unconditional love truly looked like. Losing him left an enormous silence in her life, but instead of retreating from the world, she threw herself back into her work. Audiences continued to admire her remarkable performances, often unaware that behind every role stood a woman who had endured more personal loss than most people could imagine. The pain never completely disappeared, but neither did her determination to keep moving forward. Yet despite everything that had happened, one surprising connection from her past was never fully broken. Many people assumed Anjelica and Jack Nicholson never spoke again after their painful breakup. The truth was far more complicated. Time softened some of the anger, replacing it with a quiet understanding that only comes after years of reflection. They occasionally crossed paths at industry events, exchanged conversations, and gradually found a way to exist in each other's lives, without reopening old wounds. When Anjelica published her memoir, Watch Me, Jack was among those who showed up to support her. That single appearance surprised many fans who believed their relationship had ended in permanent bitterness. Instead, it revealed something neither tabloids nor headlines had ever fully captured. Love doesn't always disappear just because a relationship ends. Sometimes it changes into something quieter, shaped by distance and acceptance rather than romance. Anjelica never pretended those 17 years had been easy, but she also refused to erase them from her life. She acknowledged both the joy and the heartbreak, because, together, they had helped shape the woman she became. Then, years later, an unexpected phone call would remind her that some bonds never completely fade. In early 2025, devastating wildfires threatened neighborhoods across Los Angeles, forcing thousands of residents to evacuate with little warning. As flames spread and uncertainty filled the air, Anjelica found herself leaving home with her pets and a trusted companion, unsure whether she'd have a house to return to. Amid the confusion, her phone rang. On the other end was Jack Nicholson. After everything they'd experienced together, the heartbreak, the betrayals, and the years apart, his first concern was simple. Was she safe? Did she have somewhere to stay? It wasn't a grand romantic gesture, nor did it erase the pain of the past, but it revealed something important about the connection they still shared. When life became truly serious, Jack reached out without hesitation. Anjelica would later say that despite all their differences, when things really mattered, he was there. That unexpected moment didn't rewrite history, but it added one final layer to a relationship that had never fit neatly into black and white definitions. And as she reflected on everything she'd lived through, she finally reached a conclusion that surprised even her. Looking back at the age of 74, Anjelica Huston no longer speaks with anger or bitterness. Instead, she speaks with remarkable honesty. She admits there were countless days filled with tears, loneliness, and disappointment. She remembers feeling overlooked, wishing for attention that never seemed to last. Yet she also refuses to pretend Jack Nicholson wasn't extraordinary. His charisma, intelligence, humor, and larger-than-life personality were all real. That, she says, is what made walking away so difficult. The hardest relationships are rarely built on constant unhappiness. They're built on unforgettable highs mixed with devastating lows, leaving you constantly hoping the next good moment will finally outweigh the pain. Over time, Anjelica realized she wasn't trying to change Jack into someone else. She simply wanted him to choose her completely. That moment never arrived. Accepting that truth became one of the greatest lessons of her life. It wasn't about assigning blame anymore. It was about understanding that love alone isn't always enough to create the future we imagine. And that realization leads to the most powerful lesson of all. Anjelica Huston's story is about far more than Hollywood glamour or celebrity headlines. It's about the complicated reality of loving someone who can make you feel both incredibly valued and deeply alone. She survived heartbreak, personal loss, professional pressure, and years of emotional uncertainty. Yet she emerged with an honesty that continues to resonate with people around the world. She built an extraordinary career, won an Academy Award, created unforgettable characters, and eventually found the peace she'd spent decades searching for. Looking back, she doesn't deny the pain, nor does she erase the love. Instead, she accepts that both can exist at the same time. Sometimes the people who shape us the most aren't the ones we're meant to spend forever with. They're the ones who teach us what we truly deserve. Perhaps that's why her story continues to fascinate audiences decades later. If this journey moved you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe it's possible to be grateful for a relationship that caused so much heartbreak, simply because it helped shape who you became? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable Hollywood story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.